If you're watching the video, that is Brandi Blue in the slideshow at the beginning. She's my guest today, here to talk about her life as a wildlife educator. It's funny, in the summer months, we'll go driving at night looking for snakes, and I remember one night, Brandi was out that same night doing the same thing with her friends, and we'd stop to say hi, and of course Brandi's in the back seat of the car carrying a little wallaby. I think she was bottle feeding it. Another time she brought a fox over to the house. So it's always fun seeing what Brandi and her friends have with them when we see her. She's got an interesting story. I mean, she went from a career in aerospace engineering to doing wildlife education. So she'll tell you about that. And you'll get that story and lots more in this great interview we'll get to in a bit. Welcome to another installment of this young program. My name is Edgar Ortega, and if you're listening to this show, thank you. This is the Edgar Ortega Radio Show. If you've been enjoying my show, please subscribe to Edgar Ortega channel on YouTube and follow the Edgar Ortega Radio Show page on Facebook to stay updated on all my latest interviews. I do a lot of animal and pet topics, but you'll also see interviews with professionals in other realms. I'm having fun with it. If you enjoy the show, please help me get the word out and share it on Facebook. It is much appreciated. If you're in Northern California and like reptiles, be sure to check out the Central Valley Herpetological Society. They meet every third Saturday of the month in Manteca, California. I started that group back in 2011, and they're still meeting, so it's great. Great group. And a good way to meet other people who share your interest in reptiles and amphibians. cvherps.org is the website. And if you're not within driving distance, there's probably a herpetological society within driving distance. I recommend you get involved with your local groups whenever you can, wherever you are. And be sure to help and be active about it. And help out those working to keep the organization going. So find one in your area and dive in. As always, I encourage you to support your local pet shelters. They use 100% of the money you donate, unlike the lying criminal enterprise known as the Humane Society of the United States, who ends up giving less than 1% of your donations to pet shelters. They have sad commercials, but don't be fooled. Donate to local shelters and local humane societies. Don't donate to TV commercials. We love animals. I love animals. I've had the pleasure of being around lots of interesting animals, both through all my animal friends and through people I've met in the reptile industry. I've also worked as a veterinary technician for several years. I've met lots of people, and it's fun introducing you to some of these people. Today is no exception. Brandi Blue is my guest. Brandi has a fun job. I did the same thing that she's doing the wildlife education work for about 2 years. It's easily the most enjoyable job I've ever had, so I know that she is having fun with it. She's out there teaching people about all manner of critters, and it really is a dream job. It's a dream job for many of you. So if you want to hear what it's like living the dream, please listen in to my interview with Brandi. Enjoy. All right, Brandi Blue has been working in the animal outreach and education field for the past 9 years. She has a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Oklahoma and is originally from Norman. She has worked with a wide variety of animals, and I hope she's about to tell us about all of them. She has done a great amount of animal education work, performing to groups numbering in the thousands. Her goal is to inspire those around her to be involved in their environments and to share in her love of animals. Brandi Blue, thank you for being here. It's good to talk to you.
Hi, Edgar. It's good to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Tell me, Brandi, and those listening about your work, like right now, what you do, what education programs are you currently running, and give us an idea of the work you're doing.
Okay, so I have a background in big cats, but right now I help run a facility called Classroom Safari, which is a nonprofit that travels based out of Northern California, and we travel all over. And we bring exotic animals to schools and birthdays and events and reptile expos, and we talk about conservation and why these animals don't exactly make great pets. And we care for about 160 animals right now, a lot of them being reptiles. But I do have a few pretty cool mammals like my baby sloth and porcupines and foxes and all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, I want to talk about all those animals you have. You mentioned you have a lot of reptiles. Those are fun because you can keep a lot of them in a small space, so they're good for education work. That's fun. Um, is this your full time job? How much time do you spend doing this? How's that go?
Yeah, so this is my full-time job, and I need two of me to really do it. There is no like off days. I used to be an engineer, and I'd work a 9 to 5, and then you have your commute home, and then it was basically your time. But a lot of the animals actually stay at my house, and so especially with the baby animals, I've been up through the night feeding, doing bottles, checking animals, especially when we have bad weather. We're running out to our ranch, checking animals' enclosures. So it's more than a full-time job. It's basically a way of life. And that's kind of how it has to be if you really want to properly care for all of your animals. It just kind of has to be your life.
Yeah, a lot of people I speak with that have a large amount of animals and do this sort of thing, they spend a lot of time caring for the animals. It's a lot of work. You have to have a strong work ethic and make sure the animals are good, plus all the other stuff you have to do in your own life. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's really intense. What animals have you worked with? You've mentioned a few, and do you currently work with? So in the past and now.
Okay, so previously, I started working in a zoo when I was 16 years old, and I didn't include that experience because I was just a tour guide. And the reason I started working with animals was because, like all kids, I wanted a pet monkey. And my mom made me go work in a zoo, and she was like, "Well, if you can figure out how to take care of it, we'll talk." Knowing I would get into a zoo and realize that I didn't want a pet monkey anymore. And so I wound up working at this little interactive zoo in Oklahoma, and it's no longer there because the owners passed away. But it was a really, really cool experience. The animal that I wanted more than anything was a squirrel monkey, and it was probably the meanest animal they had in the zoo. And I quickly realized that they weren't pets; these were still very much wild animals. Even if they were raised in captivity their entire life, they still have those wild instincts. And I just fell in love with it. I was a tour guide. I When that zoo closed down, I was in college, and I got handpicked to go to another interactive zoo in Oklahoma. And there I started working with big cats, and I got more into, I was really shy all my life. And then I was a tour guide, so that kind of got me out of my bubble. And I figured talking about animals, people aren't really looking at me, but they're looking at the animal and what the animal's doing. And they remember what I'm saying because of the animal. Um, and so I got into big cats, and there I've worked with all kinds of species of tiger. And that's probably one of my favorite big cat is a white tiger. And I've worked and raised several of those. I like tigers better than I like lions. I kind of compare tigers and lions to berms and retics, because like a lion is like, one day it's like thinking one day I'm going to get you. Where a tiger, I'm not saying it's a puppy dog, but they're more predictable than a lion is to me. And every lion trainer that I met can agree with this, and they just kind of, they're a little iffy. But I've worked with lions, I've worked with tigers. I did several jaguars and leopards. I did all kinds of bears. I did black bears. I had a 900-pound grizzly bear that I used to hand feed. And he was awesome. And then I've done camels. I've done all kinds of species of primate. My favorite primate is probably a spider monkey, because I raised one, and so I'm partial to her. And she is just awesome. She's still at the zoo there, and they still use her in education. And I used to take her everywhere with me. I was in college at the time, and I took her and I put her in my backpack, and I would go to class, and nobody knew.
Yeah.
And then I used to work with gibbons too. Those are really neat.
The
And I used
primates,
to,
yeah.
What?
The primate, the gibbons.
Yeah, primate. Yeah, kind of look like little abominable snowmen is how I describe them. And then capuchins, which is like the monkey from The Hangover. You see them all the time on TV. Super, super smart. I was part of a program that, kids with severe special needs, instead of having a dog, they would have a monkey. And so I worked with like the beginning training on several different capuchins for that program. And that was a really neat program to be a part of. So I've got a big background on primates too. My current partner and business partner, she is not a big primate fan. So the only primates we have are lemurs, ringtail lemurs. But hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to get some more primates. And then, I've done otters, and I've got, a ton of animal list. If we'd be here all day if I answered all of your questions.
No, it's great. You're exposed to all these animals. You've learned about them, and then you're able to teach others about them. You mentioned being an engineer before. How do you go from being an engineer to being Jungle Jane over here?
Yeah, so being from Oklahoma, it wasn't like, you're never going to make a ton of money working with animals. If anybody out there is aspiring to work with animals, it is so rewarding, but you're never going to be a millionaire. And so what I wanted to do is, all throughout college, I was working at the zoo and I loved my job, but I was still in college because I was like, oh, one day I'm going to have to grow up and get a real big girl job. And so that's what I did. I was working at the zoo, and then I also held a full-time job as an engineer right out of college. And I was working in this little cubicle, and my office had no windows. And engineering's primarily, I'm an aerospace engineer, so primarily a man-based field. And so I was getting a lot of crap from some older guys, and I was just like, I really don't like my job. I hated my life. I would go home and I would just be like, I had a bird, and I had a lemur and a kinkajou at home, even though I was working as an engineer. And I was just like, I hate my life. I felt so much better about myself when I was working with animals and people, and I felt like I was really making a difference. And so I just decided, you know what, I'm going to do this. Like, this is my thing. I was a minor in biology. And so I just, it's what I've always done. And, like every job I look back on, I couldn't keep a normal person job because I was always doing something with animals. I would leave and be like, oh, my lemur got out. I got to go catch her, or, something. And I just realized that was kind of where I was going. And, I've never felt better about my life than I do right now because I just love the work that I do. I do a lot of rescue with exotics, and it is, you feel good about yourself at the end of the day, and that's what matters.
So you went from a career that could be considered on a path to being pretty lucrative, right?
Yeah. I was making a lot more money starting out than I am now. 9 years into animals.
No, I imagine the difference would be quite significant.
It was a pretty big, I went from my company buying me a Range Rover to, I drove an old crappy Civic forever, and it just like, my personal and mental happiness was more to me than any amount of money. And, I go to these schools and I see kids and they make a difference in the world, and, what I do, I feel good about it. And, a lot of the animals we have now that I currently have would have no place to go if I didn't exist. Like, I have a brand new silver marble fox that I got from a wolf dog rescue up in Washington State. And they had no idea what to do with her because they didn't have the proper permitting. She was an illegal pet that somebody kind of smuggled in, and then she had gotten out, and it was just like this long drawn out story, and they had nowhere for her to go. And she is so friendly, and she's perfect for our program, but she would have had nowhere to go. She would have been stuck in a cage somewhere on display, and this is not really her personality. Like, I took her to 2 assemblies this morning, and she didn't even want to go back in her carrier. She was just loving on all of these kids. And it's just, it's really important because, like, with her, she's a big part of our education program because we talk about the fur trade with her. And, she's a red fox. And, it's really important that people realize that, not all foxes are like this. And, a lot of people want a fox as a pet, and then they realize that they smell exactly like skunks. And then they're like, maybe not. Oh. And so I just, I go from, you always have that in the back of your mind. Like, I could be pretty well off right now, but I love what I do, and that's what matters to me.
No, that's pretty interesting and very respectable. I mean, a lot of cultures push people to do certain jobs, to make the money, but and they end up with their lives. They're not very content with it. So you kind of saw that and you recognized it, and then you decided to work on your passion for animals that you've been developing ever since. That's great. You talked about that fox. I've seen it. I think it's been to my house.
Yeah, that's Loki. I brought him to your house when we first got him.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
got him in Oklahoma.
No, it's great. You always got
we
something interesting.
Yeah, but this is actually another one.
Oh,
Loki
okay.
decided so one of the things is, we bring animals to schools and all this stuff, and if they decide they don't like it, if they get stressed out, we don't bring them. And they retire with full benefits, and then they're just kind of, being taken care of, and we do enrichment and stuff with him. But he didn't like being on a leash. He didn't feel like, he didn't like that.
Good for pictures.
So he's basically retired. And Roka is a new fox. She's one of our newer ones. Loki's more striking. He is so beautiful. He's got black and white spots all over him, and he is just awesome to look at. And Roka is a little more just like the solid white side with like brown ears. But her personality is so different than his. I actually got her for Loki, so they would be friends. Loki's neutered, so I wasn't going to breed him, but I wanted him to have like a playmate if he was going to be not going to programs anymore. I wanted him to have someone to play with, and so that was really the purpose of her. And then when we got her, we just fell in love with her, and she does so good at programs. And Loki loves her, but it's not mutual. She does not like him. She loves my golden doodle, so they're paired together.
Oh, poor guy. I see pictures of you here with the wallaby. Who's that?
Yeah, so we've got this really awesome little Bennett Wallaby I got from my friend that does a rescue up in Washington State. And he's got all kinds of Bennett Wallabies and red kangaroos. And I have a really strong background with red kangaroos, and I love them. But, males stand about 5 feet tall when they're neutered and 6 feet tall when they're not neutered. So they're not really travel sized. And since we don't have a facility people come visit yet, which is something that I'm working towards, but we don't have that quite yet, we ended up getting a little Bennett Wallaby from him, and they don't do active breeding. It was kind of more or less an accident that he was born. And I love him. Normally Bennett Wallabies are really, really shy and a little standoffish to noise. When we got him, he was probably a third of the size he is now. He was just out of the pouch, and I was bottle feeding him about every 2 hours throughout the day and night. And we carried him everywhere. I would put him in my purse, actually. I had a little purse that I would carry around, and he went everywhere. He went to restaurants, grocery stores, the movies, because he was getting used to being around noise. And now he is just phenomenal. He goes right up and hops in people's laps and loves all the attention from programs. But he's pretty cool, because when he was born, Wallabies, he's a marsupial. So when he was born, his mom was pregnant for 30 days. He was born about the size of a pencil eraser, and he'll go into his mom's pouch and develop there in the next 4 to 5 months. And then at 4 to 5 months, they kind of start venturing out to explore. And then they can stay up in their mom's pouch up to like 7 or 8 months if they want. Normally mom kicks them out though before then.
Yeah, no, it's great. You acclimate the animals you work with so that they can be good education animals. You mentioned the fox. He's not
and everyone loves him. He is probably my least dangerous animal. But he eats everything. He requires the most supervision than any animal. He's supposed to eat, hay, dirt, grass, these special pellets we order called Happy Hopper. But he also is eating some of my baseboards, part of my couch, and a phone charger.
Yeah, they don't have, you can't go to the pet store and pick up some wallaby food, I guess.
No, I got a special order.
Not here anyway. How did, you mentioned how you went from engineering to working with the animals, but did you grow up with some of this? A lot of people would love to be doing what you're doing, but is this something you grew up with? Was there a path that led you there or back there?
I would love to say, I grew up in a home where animals were always loved. I remember from when I was little, I am not a frog person. That's my one animal. I'm terrified of frogs.
Frogs.
I've jumped out of a moving vehicle because there was a frog in it. Okay. But there was these tadpoles and like the top of our swimming cover. And, I'm probably 5 or 6 and I'm, putting these tadpoles in a wagon and pulling them down to my pond, on our property. And so they wouldn't die whenever we took the swimming pool cover off. And, I've always loved animals. It wasn't necessarily towards the exotic conservation side. I've always had dogs, I love cats. But I wasn't really grown up with the idea that I would be like some type of zookeeper. That was just something that happened when I was, I started really early. I was 16. That was like one of my first jobs was at a zoo, and it just stuck. Normally you have to work, people hate their jobs going through college and high school, they just, they're waiters, they hate it. I loved my job from the get-go. And so I'm not saying there's not hard times, it's hard work, but I've always loved it. I didn't grow up in a zoo type home, but I had a really supportive family that, would support me no matter what I did.
No, that's cool. Back when I could see better, I have an eye disease, so I can't see so great, but I did animal shows for about 2 years, full-time, kind of what you're doing. We'd go around, do the educational presentations. It was a lot of fun. It's the best job I ever had. I mean, if I could go back to doing that, I would do that. I ended up doing vet tech work for after my kids came around, because animals take up space, so it's a matter of the animals or kids. So I changed jobs for that reason. I think my favorite animals when I was doing that to teach the public about were reptiles. That's something I enjoy, as people know. Do you have a particular type of animal that you like teaching people more than others, or that you have a passion for educating the public about?
Yeah, I mean, I love all of my animals. Like my normal animals that I take to program, I take 9 animals basically to all of my programs. And they range. I mean, I've got an alligator. His name is Darth Gator, formerly Sarah, since you know him.
Yeah.
We have servals, but my favorite animal that I take just on the conservation side of it is lemurs, because Madagascar is approximately the size of California. It's got 3% of its natural rainforest left, and they're all endangered. Ringtail lemurs are kind of the least endangered of the species because they live in the desert areas where nobody's trying to develop. But it's really important to kind of put your foot in the door, and then people start to get to thinking. And ringtail lemurs are probably one of the most dangerous animals I work with, and people look at me like I'm crazy when I say this. But lemurs' teeth you just got to see it to believe it. Their teeth are flat. Their canine teeth are flat, and they've got serrated edges on both sides. So when they bite and slash. And so, I just, it's really important because people get these as pets in other states. And I'm like, around 2 or 3 years old, when these guys are hitting puberty, they just completely change from that super lovable animal that everyone loves to they just want to be with other lemurs. And we have 2 lemurs at our facility, and I've got a lemur back home. And they're pretty intense, and I love them because it's rewarding to be able to work with an animal that's so picky. And it's also rewarding to kind of open people's eyes up about, exotics aren't really pets. These guys take a lot of time and a lot of experience to do it correctly. And, their diet's completely different than what you would think. And it's a lot of work. And then, another animal that I can't just pick one is my sloth. I love my sloth. I've always been partial to sloths. I've worked with a lot of really cool animals that people just think are awesome. And I was sobbing when I got my sloth. I could not control myself. I was so excited. And she is just really neat and just pretty different. Most people haven't seen a sloth up close, and she's the only one that travels in Northern California. So it's pretty unique to our program, what she is. And she's really cool, but she requires a lot of maintenance. Like she has to have it about anywhere from 70 to 80 degrees and about 70 to 75% humidity.
Yeah, I've seen that sloth. I mean, it's easy. I can see how you could get attached to that one. Those of us that work with animals, or that we have a strong affinity for animals and wildlife, sometimes we have a stronger attachment to one or the other. Maybe that's that one for you. It's great to hear of all the work that people like you do to share their passion for wildlife and wildlife education. I think it's also good to make a distinction between, say, the work you do for animals and, say, the work of, say, animal rights groups. Usually animal people, they get lumped into this big category of, well, animal people. But you're not the animal rights type. You're someone who understands the need to educate about animal welfare. Talk to me about the difference between these two philosophies or schools in the world of animal people.
Yeah, so I mean, in every group, you're going to have, good and bad. And so, unfortunately, the same thing goes for animal people. There's good teachers, there's bad teachers, there's good cops, there's bad cops, unfortunately. And, normally the good outweigh the bad, which is awesome. But, there's always that one person that ruins it for the rest of the class. And
they get all the attention.
Yeah. And it's just, there's a reason there's laws in place to prevent stuff like this. Animal rights people kind of go a little over the top. Like, they would not let you have a dog as a pet because they think it needs to be in the wild. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a 3-pound Maltese that would not last a day in the wild. She sleeps on my pillow.
Yeah.
And, my lemur has never been to Madagascar. Would I love to have her be in Madagascar? 100%. But she also doesn't eat the peels off apples. She is accustomed to living in captivity. She will have a longer life in captivity, and so she will never be able to be returned to the wild. The only animal that I own that could live in the wild would possibly be my alligator, but he has lost his fear of people. He would go right up to a person. And so when he's, 10 feet long,
anyway.
Yeah, it's like, none of my animals can be returned to the wild. So why not use them as ambassadors for their species and get people excited to want to keep these guys in the wild? It's really important. We're all part of the same ecosystem. We need to, protect it. And so, like, animal rights people, I'm just going to use a common one, which is Blackfish, the movie.
Yeah.
I know some of the trainers that are in that film, and what they were told was this was a tribute to Dawn, the trainer that died, and the editing staff warped their speeches and kind of twisted it to make it be what the producers wanted from that show, and they were writing them in. They said, they asked them to wait till after the awards season before they went public with their speeches, and they didn't. And, that movie blew up, and it's just like, it's kind of false information. I'm not saying you should take orcas out of the wild. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think every animal fits in the wild needs to stay there. But, it was kind of like a miscommunication, and I feel like that's kind of the way with animal rights versus animal welfare. Animal welfare is what I am for, and that's the proper treatment of captive animals. Like, I don't think I should take an animal from the wild and put it in captivity unless the animal is in dire need, life-threatening situation. I would rather an animal be in the wild. That's my whole point of my job, is to get people to want to protect the wild that they live in. And so I feel like, my animals, I have animal rights groups that want to just come in and take the animals and release them. Whether they live a day, they feel like it's the best thing for it, where I don't think so. I've got a serval that acts like a Labrador Retriever. I'm not saying all servals act like that, but he's awesome. You've met Tai too. And, he would be completely lost because he wasn't raised in the wild. He didn't get the same conditioning that a normal serval cub would.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Because I can't give that to him.
Yeah, a lot of these animal rights groups think we should just open the doors to all the cages in the zoos and let them go and think they'd be well off.
Yeah.
No, it's just silly.
Yeah.
Didn't you mention the Blackfish movie implicating that all these whales are taken out of the wild? And as far as I know, I think they're after a point they were all bred in captivity, I think.
Yeah, and there actually hasn't been one successful release of an orca back into the wild, and they don't mention that.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten to the point where they actually shut down the orca program at SeaWorld.
They've actually shut it completely down.
So unfortunately, there's no longer a program in place to educate people about orcas out in the wild. People love to see that. If they see these animals, they're less likely to do things to endanger them in the wild.
Right.
So it's
and that's the whole, that's what I've learned is I've done programs without animals where I come and just give a lecture about animals, and people think it's cool. I show pictures and
PowerPoint.
Stuff. Yeah, I do a PowerPoint, but it's a completely different experience. And they're like, I saw Tai2 or my serval do a 4-foot jump in my class. And I want to make sure that there are servals in the wild now because I remember Tai2. And that's what I want to inspire kids, adults, anybody that will hear my message about why these animals deserve to be here with us. They didn't ask for people to destroy their environment, but we can do our best to protect them and give them a safe haven. And that's kind of why my job is so important to me anyways, is just being able to have a voice for them because they don't have a voice for themselves.
Yeah. No, with these animals, you mentioned doing the talks with people and maybe being a little shy before. I had a strong phobia of public speaking, even in college, and so it wasn't until I started doing the animal shows I noticed, people aren't really looking at me. They don't care about me. They just want to look at the animal.
It's helped me too, because I used to be really shy. Growing up, I was really shy. I cared a lot about what people thought of me, and that was something that just kind of faded away with time because, people don't remember, people remember me as the animal girl. They don't really remember my name. They remember Taitu. They remember Darth Gator. They remember my hedgehog Pocahontas, and this is people that have seen me years and years and years ago. People like from Oklahoma that will be like, I remember you came to my daughter's 5th birthday party, and she still talks about it to this day.
Yeah.
That's what I want is, because you don't know who you're inspiring. If, they might be a 2nd grader today, but someday that 2nd grader is going to grow up. Maybe they become a scientist that discovers, a way to conserve, their land and find alternate resources for them because, and it all started when they were in 2nd grade and they saw my lemur.
Yeah, or any animal
or any of my animals,
something that stood out to them.
Yeah, it's funny that I bring up orcas. Orcas are my all-time favorite animal. Never worked with them, but I would love to. And
it's a little harder
orcas,
now, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, right? I never pursued the marine mammal. I was from Oklahoma. We didn't have any oceans nearby, so I never really pursued that aspect of it. But I used to go and see orcas. I would go to SeaWorld, and I remember, vividly as a 6-year-old, like, I thought that was the neatest job, and I wanted to be just like that trainer. And, so I guess that's basically where my love of animals started, and I used to watch Free Willy all the time. It was my favorite movie of all time. And, when I started working with animals, I got an orca tattoo because that's where it all started for me, is I would go and talk to these trainers, and my parents got me, like, where I could go back behind the scenes and I could talk to all the trainers. And, they told me, stay in school and you study and you work hard enough, this will all work out. And they were right. I didn't work out with orcas, but, I still feel like my job is just as important. And I love it. I love every day.
Yeah, no, it's interesting what animals can do. And I was going to touch a little bit on the fact that if you're scared to speak in public, grab some animals and get in front of some people, and you'll notice that it's not so bad, and it's actually it's good therapy. Now I can get up in front of people, no problem. So it's kind of the same thing. We often become who we are because we look up to somebody, or different people. We have these role models that we use as guides for people that we want to be. It's good to have role models, these inspirational people who drive us. Towards what we want to become, whether we want to be like them or our own person, guided by these people we look up to and admire. Who's inspired Brandi?
That's an easy one. That's Steve Irwin. I talk about him in every program that I do because a lot of people are kind of forgetting him because he's no longer on, they play reruns, but I've noticed that a lot of the animal shows have become kind of more of a reality show. And I loved Steve Irwin's The Crocodile Hunter show. It was so educational and funny, and he was so charismatic where you wanted to be like him. I remember I wanted to be like him, and I know he inspired so many people to love animals and love animals that aren't necessarily on the top of everyone's list, like crocodiles, alligators.
Yeah.
I would watch his show, and I'd be like, oh, I love alligators. I love crocodiles. And I wanted to be just like him, and, there's all kinds of other extremely important animal people, Jane Goodall, all these people that kind of played a part. But if I had to pick one, it would definitely be Steve Irwin. And I know there's so many other people out there that feel the same way because he was such an inspiration to so many people and so important, and I love the fact that his whole family kind of followed in his footsteps and still work with animals and still kind of spread his message around. I just feel like that's so important.
Yeah, he left all the cute fuzzy animals to Terry, I think. He did his own thing. I think she called them the real animals.
The real animals, yeah.
No, how has I mean, do you have any education background? You said you had a biology minor. How has that that portion of your education, that's a number of classes, how's that prepared you for the work you do, or has it at all?
Yeah, it's always important to really know the science behind every animal. And before we're allowed to get an animal, experience with somebody else's always helps. So having friends in the animal world really helps me because not only, you can only take a book so far. It's important to have that background. So, I know the basic, how to. I took zoology and all that fun stuff. And so I know the basic how to, but I would honestly say experience has made me who I am because, until you're really hands-on with that animal, you have no idea. People go to college and they go for animal training, but they've never worked with an animal. And it's a completely different world. It does help you. I'm not saying don't go to college and don't go to places that train animal or, study on animal training. That does help you. That gives you the mental preparedness for it. Okay, so if this happens, I know that I'm supposed to do such and such. But at the same time, until you actually do it, you're not ready. And so, like, when we go to get an animal, we do our complete background. When we're filling out paperwork, we have to know scientific name. We have to know what it eats, what care it needs, what size enclosure it needs, what enrichment items it's going to need. This whole list. We have to have a vet ready to go that knows about that animal. Any medications that we're going to need, any quarantine we're going to need to do. I mean, it's a big, long process. And, my background helps me know what that process is. And then my experience piles onto that. My experience with all these different animals and knowing the right people in the animal world. So, like, let's say I wanted to add something that I'm wanting to add to my program is a tamandua, which is in the sloth family. Now, I have only worked with tamanduas a few times, and it's been brief. I've never owned it and worked with it on a daily basis, but I have friends that do. And, so I can reach out to them and get their enrichment plans. And, experience and knowing the right people really help in the animal world because, we're all kind of learning on a learning curve together.
No, that's cool. Maybe someday you'll use your education your education in engineering and combine it somehow with your animal.
I can build some pretty cool cages. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah, you can build a cool jetpack for some poor critter. Yeah. Here's the question. It would seem like, well, everybody loves animals. I mean, most people, they love animals. You don't have to work too hard to get people interested when you pull out an animal that's hanging on you. So it seems that it's a natural instinct to care for these creatures, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been an animal lover.
Right. So where does the education come? Why do people need to be reminded that these animals are here on this planet? What is the goal of wildlife education?
Because even though you I'm going to take a slow loris, for example. Education is going to be very important if you see a slow loris in the wild because you're going to know they're venomous. Not all of these animals are puppy dogs. You
got to know what
kittens.
It is first, too.
Yeah. You're going to want to know what it is. You're going to want to know if you're taking care of that animal. You're going to want to know what it eats, what kind of habitat it's going to need, what enrichment items it needs to be mentally happy. If you're walking down the road and you see this is just from basic herping. If you're walking down the road and you see a snake, I would want to know what kind of snake that is. What's its native habitat? Is it out at an odd time of the day? There's a billion, if it's venomous or non-venomous. I grew up in Oklahoma, and something that I was always told growing up is if, the snake has a triangle head, it's venomous.
Yeah.
and boas have triangle heads, and
yeah.
My red tail is not venomous. And so, education goes a long way with even just, hiking to taking care of animals. You're going to want to know all about that animal before you ever even think about working with one.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, too. Once people are exposed to these animals, We don't really. I mean, the work really doesn't have an immediate effect, I don't think. But later on, they might remember that animal they saw, and it's kind of a long-term thing. I mean, maybe they work for a corporation and they're having to decide on something, and it might, affect the population of some certain species or something, and they might think back to that thing they learned from that person talking about animals. Who knows?
Yeah, the possibilities are endless, and that's why I love it.
Yeah.
From somebody picking up a snake off the road and moving it off the road to, somebody doing something like what you said, being able to protect an entire environment. Or maybe they're doing a research study on, something that people don't realize, is rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes are big out here. A lot of people are terrified of rattlesnakes, and I used to be one of them. I grew up in the South, and I knew rattlesnakes were bad news. And so, you always go get your shovel, and that's what people did. And then, in every program I talk about why rattlesnakes are so important for our environment.
Yeah, well, you're in Oklahoma. They have those rattlesnake roundups.
Yeah, those make my stomach hurt now because I never even knew what they were growing up. And even though I was terrified of rattlesnakes, back home I would know that those were wrong. But yeah, there's a little different of a mindset back there. Rattlesnakes kill livestock. They do a whole bunch of stuff that's pretty bad for the environment, or for farmers. And, people get bit by rattlesnakes, and it's not a fun sight. So I get why people are scared of them. But what people don't ever realize is the good they do. Their venom is starting to be a treatment for cancer. I have a friend that's in Thailand right now doing king cobra research, and he's talking about the medicine value of the venom and all the different possibilities we can get from this. And people don't really realize that. People don't realize Gila monster venom is a treatment or is a medicine.
Yeah, for diabetes.
Yeah, and so, people don't really realize the good that comes from all these animals that might be a little different. And so that's why, the education just kind of goes back into it. It's just so important that people really realize the importance of them, I think, is the main thing, whether they want to do something to protect them or maybe it's just leaving them alone. Something that we do is we do rattlesnake removal. We'll go and get rattlesnakes and move them for free and move them to like a different area so they're not around people. But yeah, I really, really do love what I do. And I feel like, education has a big part of the background and prepping for it. But until you work with an animal, that's where you get another side of the experience. Working with animals is like a two-sided experience. You got to have the mindset, you got to have the work ethic, you've got to have the background in education, and then you've got to work for your experience.
Yeah, and so getting into these animals, you might find a love for them, and then you might study more of them, and then as we study more about them, scientifically, really get into it, you might discover these amazing things. Like I talked with Carl Person recently, and he talked about snake venom being used. It's basically on the way to basically cure breast cancer. It's amazing. The things that they're finding out, and it's all through people that are interested in animals, and they're discovering all these things. Now, you're in Northern California. I mean, people can maybe meet you if they're listening to this. They can say, "Hey, I want to meet Brandi Blue and her animals." Where can people find out more about the programs that you do, and where can they get a hold of you?
Okay, so my website is classroomsafari.org. And all of our contact information, plus a lot of our animals are on there. Another really great resource is Facebook. We are always updating pictures on Facebook. We just put a bunch of pictures of our sloth. And we also put, our upcoming events on the website and on Facebook. If you're not in Northern California, maybe you're in Central. And we do a lot of programs down there. Like we've got a bunch of reptile expos coming up, where we're going to be guest speakers and have a big booth with all of our animals there. And you'll be able to see our porcupines and our sloth and servals and foxes and all that. Gila monsters will all be there. So our website, that we also just made an Instagram account, which is Classroom Safari. And a lot of the Instagram stuff actually goes to my personal Instagram, which is Safari_Brandi.
Yeah, so we'll promote that on here too. Was there somewhere else?
And so that's basically what we have as far as like the way of contacting. My phone number is on there, and we love to talk to animal people too. So I mean, if you see a weird animal and you're like, I just want to figure out what this is, we love that. We love to talk to people about animals, whether it's booking us for a program or they just have a question about a raccoon in their backyard. So we talk. We get a lot of interesting calls. One of the most interesting calls I got was actually last night. Somebody found an illegal coatimundi running through their yard. So we got called out at about 1 a.m. to go try to help catch this thing.
Did they know what it was?
Yeah, and so we do a lot of rescue work as well as just the average programs, and so that's another option. We have a lot of rescue reptiles, and in addition to the reptile rescue, and just people that we know that love reptiles, we get a lot of rescue reptiles, and we use them in our programs.
No, that's great, Brandi. It's been super fun talking with you. I got to sit you down here for a while. I appreciate you taking time out of your animal work to speak with me. I'm not nearly as cute or cuddly as some of the animals I've seen you carrying around, so I'm grateful that you spent a few minutes here with me. Thank you for being here, Brandi Blue.
Thank you, Edgar. It was fun.
The website is classroomsafari.org. If you want Brandi to pack up her animals and come to your event, classroomsafari.org is where you go for information on that. Also, I mentioned the Central Valley Herpetological Society, Manteca, California. Brandi's often there, so you can meet her there. If you see her, say hi. Tell her you heard her interview on my program. Thank you again for listening. Coming up tomorrow, my interview with Jerry Hartley, the man behind LocalityRosies.com. If you're into rosy boas, you won't want to miss that one. I sat down with Jerry and he shared his 30 years of experience with me on finding rosy boas in the wild. So if you want some tips on finding rosy boas to observe them in nature, watch for my interview with Jerry Hartley tomorrow, only on the Edgar Ortega Radio Show. If you enjoyed this show, please share it on Facebook, share, follow, and then go over to YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Stay updated on all my uploads. And I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. We'll talk rosy boas. I'm Edgar Ortega, and this has been the Edgar Ortega Radio Show.